Wow, you must all just be miserable fucks.
That's fucking easy for you to say. You have, like, boundless energy. You're like the fucking sun, dude. You can just, like, wake up on a Tuesday and be like, this is my new year. No one else can do that, yo.
Hey, well, Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2017. This is Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world, and we decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I'm Troy Polidori, and I'm going to question Austin as to whether or not it really is a Happy New Year because Derek Parfit died already.
I don't even know who that is. Who is Derek Parfit?
Oh, really?
Nope.
Analytic philosopher? Reasons and persons? On what matters?
I don't do analytic philosophy, Troy. I don't give a fuck. Now, how come people aren't complaining already that 2017 is like the worst year ever? It's only been 2 days and famous analytic philosophers are dying. God damn it. Let's run it. Let's try to make ourselves happy.
Wait till the next celebrity dies. Yikes.
All right, sweet. Well, welcome to the first episode of Owls at Dawn in 2017. T-Roy, what's going on this week? What are we doing?
Well, first off, we're starting with the shitty minute. This is where one of us rants about whatever it is that's really grinding our gears this week. And Austin, the torch is yours.
All right. So my shitty minute is something that actually Troy and I have already talked about quite a bit. So now I'm just going to air my grievances to continue the Festivus idea in a new way. I believe in the possibility of human communication most of the time. Doesn't matter what tribe individuals belong to. I am an optimist and believe that it is possible to have genuine human dialogue and that minds and hearts can be transformed and changed. But I am going to bitch and complain about Twitter in particular as being a site of just simple, violent communication. And I don't understand what it is, but I feel like the majority of voices on Twitter, I dare even would say every motherfucker on Twitter is snarky and rude and short, and people are trying to use ironic turns, like by pointing out the hypocrisy of the other side, right? Whatever other side is, whether it's liberals criticizing conservatives or conservatives criticizing liberals, whether it's Austrian economists trying to criticize Marxists or post-Keynesians trying to criticize, people from the von Mises Institute, people just can't help themselves, it seems, and they must resort to snarky irony, rude, pithy, curt criticisms, and it is fucking driving me crazy, bro. Like, I shaved all my hair off, so I don't have any hair right now, but if I did have hair, it would make me want to pull my hair out. It is, I think that part of it is because of the medium, right? You have 140 characters, so people don't have the time, maybe, and so they don't feel like they have the patience, but I feel like it's getting worse, dude. I don't know if it is getting worse. I don't know if people have always just been assholes, or if there's something about the platform of Twitter that seems to stimulate assholeness, but it's tiring, bro. It is tiring to observe and to watch. It's tiring to try to resist in my own heart, and I can't help but wonder how exhausting it must be for individuals that are constantly engaged in it. Like, don't they get fucking exhausted by stimulating their own manufactured dramas and then living in that shit? They just fucking live in it, bro, day after day. And when you follow the same people and you see them spouting out this same negative, curt bullshit, it just makes me think, wow, you must all just be miserable fucks. And unfortunately, and this is the thing that really bugs me, unfortunately, most of the people that I am associated with on Twitter are somehow, at least nominally, related to the left. And all it does is make me look at them and be like, well, no wonder people think you're fucking assholes, because you are assholes. And I don't know, man. It's driving me crazy. I'm almost going to pull a T-Roy and start to pull myself out of the social media world, but I just haven't quite gotten there yet. Because I still believe in hopeful possibility. So I've actually had a couple of really nice, stimulating back and forths with individuals talking about economics and philosophy and politics and shit like that have gone on for extended periods of time. And they've actually been fruitful dialogues because I believe it's possible. And I'm bucking the trend. And I'm just going to keep reading Marshall Rosenberg, and I'm going to try to learn what nonviolent communication means. And I'm going to try to implement that in my own life moving forward. So that is my shitty minute. Let's all read Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication before we engage in any sort of social media discourse. I'm done.
You know, I've known you for 10 years, Austin, and I'm not sure I've ever actually seen you angry. But that was probably the closest I've ever seen you to being legitimately, like, upset.
Like, bullshit aside, I actually genuinely am. I genuinely am upset. It actually really does hurt me, and it bothers me. I think in the same way that I was hurt and bothered when I was in the tribe of the evangelical community, and I would hear evangelical Christians be assholes and serve as impediments to their own cause. You know, because when you really do believe in something, you do believe this is the better way, or this is the right way to view things, or this is the narrative of emancipation, you want to include other people, right? I mean, isn't that the fucking point?
I mean, it would be if that was the actual reason for believing, or it's just, you know, an arrogant posturing.
I just have a hard time with the arrogant posturing, bro. And I feel like that is the common discourse of the day, is arrogant posturing, you know?
It is a strong point, though, I think you made in the midst of that rant, that given Twitter's formats, you can't really have, like, a threaded conversation. It's impossible to follow threads on Twitter. Like, I just give up whenever I see that shit. And so it's basically just, you know, pithy little remarks. So if you're going to have a conversation with someone you disagree with, then it's going to be snarky. That's just kind of how it works, right?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I guess I think that the format lends itself to that, but I think that also means that people are just capitulating to the sort of path of least resistance, you know, rather than doing multiple replies and multiple ats and shit like that, and then actually trying to create a thread where you can actually develop a thought in a way that is kind and perspicuous at the same time. People just want to throw out the little one-liners and resort to mockery. And if somebody says something that you disagree with, then you do. You just sort of like, you know, use some sort of sarcastic remark that's like, well, obviously this is a really smart position, you climate change deniers. And it's like, well, okay, but do we need to constantly try to be passive-aggressive? I don't know. It makes me angry. Because you wouldn't, especially with people who are kind of like maybe pacifistic in their sort of political outlook on things, but yet they're using straight up different forms of violence and aggression. And I don't think that we can use the whole, well, the other side does it. That argument does not work to me. I don't think that that's useful, and I don't know, man. It really does. It actually really does genuinely upset me.
See, Austin, this is why you should just never talk to people.
I can't do
I've
that.
been trying to convince you of this for like 10 years.
I can't do that.
It's not getting through your thick skull, man.
I know, man. I know.
Or at least, for my sake, can you just talk to people that you know?
I think I'm setting myself for like serious lifelong disappointment.
I do wonder, like we've talked previously, I do think there's something to say about the fact that our technology has sort of exceeded our grasp in terms of where we're able to how far we're able to extend our norms of communication. So the way you treat somebody in an environment that you're comfortable with, and that's existed for a long time, like a classroom or a dinner table or whatever. There are certain norms that we all know you're supposed to follow during those things and those situations, whereas the internet is a completely like norm-less environment for the most part. And so maybe in 50 years, well, that will be different, and we will have basic norms of communication for the internet and social media platforms, and so we won't be constantly dicks to each other. There's probably something to that, but at the same time, the format is so, it just drives you towards that snarky assholery.
I know.
Like, I don't see how it's ever really going to be. It's going to be so hard to ever actually enforce those norms.
Yeah, and you know what's going to be really interesting is a sort of like long-term study of the ways in which those platforms translate into our actual material relations in the analog world, so to speak. So are people that are going to the deli to order a sandwich, are they preconditioned by the saturated snark of Twitter discourse so that that's how they carry out the rest of their social relations? And in what ways does that happen? Because I would say it certainly does. So what I wonder is to what extent and in what ways does that happen? Or is it the sort of thing that people just have these various different personalities and that there is no crossover? I doubt that, of course, but I'm curious to see what happens.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that, the way that you're sort of entertaining yourself on social media and engaging with certain forms of communication infects the way you communicate in the analog world. That's a good segue also, because this week on our main segment, we're talking about fake news and the post-truth world.
Yay! Let's get into it, brother!
All right, so I thought we'd start talking a little about the context of this, in case you haven't heard these terms yet. They're pretty ubiquitous, right? In news, social media, and elsewhere. Fake news, post-truth. We're hearing a lot about this, especially from liberals, right? Although, very interestingly, it's been kind of co-opted by the right as well, accusing mainstream media outlets of being fake news. And we can get into that as well. But the basic context is that the election hinged on like 13 different things. Were basically marginal factors that could have changed the outcome of the election. It was so close in terms of the swing states. But one of those many things was the fake news phenomenon on Facebook. Now, I'm not on Facebook, not to like blow on my knuckles and rub my chest or anything, but I'm still well aware of...
I'm not on Facebook. I only listen to Mozart, and I only read the original texts of philosophers. I don't even read secondary literature.
I don't even read primary literature, man. I read the stuff, I only read the stuff that influenced the stuff. So if I want to know Plato, I don't read Plato. I read only Parmenides.
Yeah, exactly. You read Homer and you read Ovid, and that's about it.
If I want to read somebody, I find out what was in their book collection and read that, and then reconstruct their own work for myself.
I read the Sumerian Kings List, and I read hieroglyphs. So what?
I've actually only ever read Hammurabi's Code. That's the only thing I've ever read, and I reconstructed the rest of history from that.
I've only ever spoken with Hammurabi through a medium when I was looking into a crystal ball.
Anyway, what are we talking about? Oh, fake news. You're aware of this, right? Have you seen this stuff on Facebook?
It's weird. I didn't notice it until I noticed it, and now I can't not notice it. Does that make sense? Like, I didn't notice that it was a thing until the very end of 2016. I mean, I'm thinking like the month of November, when people started talking about fake news being one of the terms that arose in 2016 as one of the more popular. And I was like, really? Was that a term? Where the fuck was I? And then every single day I was like, oh, fake news. Like the slogan, the term fake news was everywhere. So it's like I didn't notice it, even though I noticed the phenomenon. And then when I noticed the term fake news, now in my fucking feeds, in my news platforms that I follow, like my Flipboard or whatever it is that I have that consolidates all my news sources, all of that shit. I'm constantly just seeing new articles about fake news. So yeah, it's fucking everywhere.
And since it had such a huge effect on the election, there's been a whole lot of hand-wringing, especially from the center and center-left, about the idea that since people basically were heavily influenced by a lot of these really ridiculous fake news stories, especially about Clinton, that we now live in a post-truth world where true reporting, true journalism doesn't matter anymore. You can post complete bullshit that 5 seconds of research would reveal as being complete bullshit, and have a huge impact on even things as large as a national election or presidential election, and that means that we live in a whole new world. Everything's changed.
Yeah,
you buying that hypothesis?
So supposedly, when did this shift happen? This year is when we became a post-truth world?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't think anybody would go so far that I've seen as to say it literally just happened overnight. That's strange credulity, right? But there is at least seems to be a sense in the whining and the hand-wringing that this is a thing that just kind of happened without, like, I don't know, telling us.
Yeah, or at the very least, 2016 was the culmination, so that post-truth wasn't the fringe, but was now the norm. That is the standard way that information is delineated through a prism of post-truthness, whatever the fuck that means.
Or perhaps it was harmless before, like it was the same as supermarket tabloids, and that now supermarket tabloids haven't swung elections or had disastrous effects on climate change legislation or anything like that, right? Whereas this sort of occurrence changes things. Perhaps that's part of it, I guess, as well.
Yeah, because I have heard a lot of people, like you say, center-left sort of American liberals, that are trying to remind people, it's like, but remember, during the Bush era, Fox News was the bearer of post-truthiness, right? Whereas now it's like Breitbart and The Blaze and shit like that. But their whole thing was, no, Fox News, we constantly kept saying that it's always kind of been like this. Fox News was the place where there was just an unabashed sort of support, ideological support of the Bush administration, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, and I think the hand-wringing side would say to that, yes, that's true, but at least Fox News had its label on there, and anybody who's watching Fox News knows what it is. I mean, even those who are, slavingly beholden to Fox News do know that it's a mouthpiece for their own ideological views. I don't think anybody really claims otherwise. Who's like
except for their slogan, which is fair and balanced.
But I mean, everyone knows they're winking when they say that. Literally, everybody knows that.
Dude, I don't think so.
I mean, maybe a couple of grandmas out there think
no,
that's the case.
Dude. I swear, I think that individuals that on the reg consume Fox News information believe that is true. That what they're saying is the opposite, is the correct response to the sort of ideological bastardization of truth that you get from the communist news network, as they call CNN, right, or MSNBC, that they are ideologically brainwashed and that Fox News are the harbingers of truth.
Oh, no, absolutely. But again, the messenger is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
You know Fox News, and they're going to align themselves with a certain viewpoint, which you might think is totally right. It's the same thing as like when we were in college and you would read a specific kind of theological text or journal or a radio show or podcast, whatever. You know where they're coming from, right? You know they're going to have a specific viewpoint. Even if you agree with it, you still know that it's coming from that author, right? That source. Whereas now with fake news, because Facebook curates it in a specific way, you don't even know the author. You don't even know where it's coming from. And so everything just kind of defaults to being objective. And I remember reading a little bit about how, psychologically, we've been bred to kind of see text as being automatically objective as a default. Whereas when we hear someone's voice or other forms of information gathering or presentation, we have different defaults, especially if it's a male voice or a female voice, or it's someone who we think is white or black or Hispanic or whatever, right? That'll change our conception of its objectivity. But text, we automatically default because we grew up reading textbooks in classrooms, and we're told to just kind of accept those things as being facts and not having any value. That when we obscure the author and the source of something and just have text by itself, we just default to it being objective and fact-based, which really influences this fake news thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
That said, I think we can push back a little bit on this hypothesis that fake news is this has ushered in this horrible post-truth dystopia apocalypse, or whatever it is, and everything will never be the same.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to remember a time when news wasn't post-truth.
Yeah, I mean, we've always been post-truth, right?
Yeah. Now, do you mean that, because, a lot of people think that there's this characterization, right, of the postmodern turn or of postmodernism, that there was a shift in the cultural tides that used to believe in objective truth, that our words had to match with things as they are out in the real world, correspondence theory of truth sort of thing. I say that is a tree, and if the tree really is a tree, and if my words therefore map onto that reality, then we have a true statement, right? Or as the analytic philosophers like to talk about, a true statement is a justified true belief, right? And then the postmodern turn supposedly moved away from that, and the caricature, at least, of it is that it was about your own subjective opinion on things, and you have this sort of proliferation of relativism, and that your truth is good for you and my truth is good for me, and I have no right to tell you otherwise. And so there's like this perceived supposed clash of epistemological frameworks. So is that what you mean when you say we've kind of always been post-truth, that we have always been postmodern, that we have always been relativists, that truth is merely relative or perspectival, and that there is no way in which we can actually talk about things as they happened in themselves?
No. In the sense that, that's what I'm saying at least.
Right.
In the sense that absolutely I think that there is such a thing as truth, and I'm not a hardcore relativist or anything like that. At the same time, I think there's a sense in which we need to know that knowledge is, in a sense, relative or affected by other factors, especially social and economic factors. And so, for instance...
Which we can maybe, when you say social and economic factors, we could maybe, if I can, boil that down to power. Can we say that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to get there, but yeah, absolutely. What do you mean by power? Go ahead and define that.
Okay, no, go ahead. Develop your thought a little more.
Okay, we'll get back to that power idea. But I mean, I was thinking about, I think we probably all learned in 11th grade U.S. history about who's the newspaper man who Citizen Kane is based on. Is it William Randolph Hearst?
Yeah, Hearst.
Yeah, and starting the like Spanish-American War, was it, or whatever?
Yeah, and the reason that weed is illegal is largely because of him, because hemp was being used, and it's a much more sustainable and much more versatile resource than paper, to print paper, like newspapers, and even fucking Henry Ford built a car out of hemp. But because Hearst thought it was going to cut into his profits, he put a kibosh on that shit, so...
Yeah, exactly, right.
Him and the alcohol lobby, they were like, oh, really? You guys want to use hemp? Nope, hemp is illegal now.
Yeah, yellow journalism's been a thing forever, right? As long as the printed word has been a thing. So, in that sense, like, if you want to find out if news is fake or if it's true, whatever, look at power relations, right? Who are the people who have control over the printed word, and what are they trying to do with that? How are they trying to execute and enforce their power in a social setting? And so we look at now, and who are the people who are making money off of fake news on Facebook? It's some Macedonian teenager, whatever it is, who's publishing these stories and had no idea it would, as a kind of a joke, I guess, was part of it, and had no idea to have this large of an effect on things. And it's kind of regretting the fact that it helped elect Trump, right? And so the capitalist profit mode...
Is this a real thing?
Oh yeah, there was some like teenager in Macedonia who published a whole bunch of these fake news stories about Clinton as kind of like an ironic joke or whatever, and they got shared like 6 billion times or whatever, and then he was interviewed and was like, I had no idea this would happen, and I'm kind of regretting that it ever happened in the first place.
No shit. Wow, okay. Oh, yeah. I didn't know it was linked back to a single source.
Oh, not all of it, but he was a big one. But anyway, yeah, the profit motive, right, the capitalist profit motive is a huge factor here. Journalism and newspapers have always been about trying to make money, of course. And now, since we have stories being able to be shared on the internet, it's really easy to just make up a story. We call that clickbait, right? Anything with a headline that will get the most clicks gets the most advertising revenue and makes you the most money. So why would you ever need to write an in-depth, studied, resourced, a true piece of journalism when you can make a clickbaity headline that has to do with Kanye West's Alien Baby, and then all of a sudden you've gotten 1 million clicks?
And I don't remember what the statistic is, but I think it's something like 60% of headlines don't actually get clicked on. It's just that the headline itself gets read without actually having read the article. And very often, if I go to Yahoo Sports or if I look at a headline, it's some sort of trumped up, overly dramatic quote or a quote taken out of context or some sort of quick little pithy summary of what's supposedly being said in the article. And usually it's something way more dramatic than the actual article itself says, right? So it's like, so-and-so is leaving this thing because they're fed up. And then you read the article and they're like, yeah, it was time and I just wanted to spend some more time with my children. And I got a little bit fed up with, not being able to go to my kids' plays. It wasn't like as dramatic, but they used the word fed up and they used the word so-and-so is leaving, and they kind of smashed it together to create a titillating headline. And so people get that titillating headline, and then that creates this sort of habit where you just need similar titillating headlines in order to offer a product to people. And that's what, again, drives those revenues. But when you actually read a lot of the articles, even the ones, granted, some of the articles are fucking bullshit and they're fake, but even the ones that maybe aren't, they're still being conditioned by this fake news phenomenon to drive eyeballs through the medium of clickbait.
Yeah, exactly. And the important thing to point out is that this has never not been the case, right? I mean, think about who was the curator of news before we even had printed media. In the West, at least, it was the church, right? Yeah, the papal encyclical, or even if it's just the pastor on Sunday ruminating on the week's events, theological significance of. That's basically a form of news, right? And there's clear power relations happening there. In the same sense that they're happening today, it's just much more, it's less ubiquitous. And the source a lot better. It's still power relations, just of a different sort now. So this hand-wringing over post-truth, I think, tends to assume that we had a time when you had trusted news sources, and you could always assume that they were driven by the journalistic norms that we all celebrate and care about. And while it's probably true that there was some sense in which maybe we had an easier time figuring those things out before, that's basically, that seems really like deflated compared to what the actual hand-wringing that's happening today. There was never a time when we had a full access to truth through benign journalists or something.
See, but a lot of times you do hear people bemoan the fact that we don't have journalistic integrity, and so they like to talk about Walter Cronkite or this golden era of the news reporter in the middle of the 20th century, where these journalists were committed to this, whatever it means, this amorphous notion of journalistic integrity. So was there a sense in which there was that there were platforms where you could have more of an investigative journalistic integrity, or is even that idea of journalistic integrity itself a sort of constructed bullshit myth that really never, was existent?
What do you think? Is journalistic integrity a constructed mythology for the sake of CNN making money?
Yeah, of course. In one sense, I do think so, because I think everything is a constructed mythology, but that's just my personal hobby horse. But I do wonder if in an age where information can be spouted by anybody and publicly consumed like a teenager in Macedonia who just wants to fuck with people, that is different than when you have somebody who is educated, who at least is trying to express some sort of version, some sort of journalistic version of a Hippocratic oath, right? I don't know what the journalistic version of that would be, but the idea is that you would do no harm and that you are committed to the idea of investigating for the purpose of informing. I do think that there is a difference, right, between an era now where anyone can post anything and it can be consumed by millions of people versus that time when it wasn't, that people had to turn into a centralized force, a centralized power structure in order to receive something. And supposedly there was a vetting process that would ensure that at least there was a higher standard or a higher degree of journalistic integrity, whatever that means. And so I do think that there's a sense in that. But what I don't think that means is that there was some sort of freedom from ideological control mechanisms. And that's what the issue is that there are always ideological control mechanisms. Walter Cronkite was still living under a market logic. He was still conditioned by living under a capitalist system where individuals are viewed as isolated, atomistic beings that are exchangeable on a market, and labor is something that is a commodity that's exchanged, and therefore the news is something that's to be used for public consumption, but it's also used to drive eyeballs, to stimulate advertising revenues. Now, I do know that there was a time, and I don't know what the date is exactly, but there was a time when, like in the UK with the BBC, where news stations in the United States operated in the black. Or wait, not in the black. What's it called? Where
In the red.
In the red. Thank you. They operated in the red. Well, now they're definitely operating in the black. No, where they operated in the red, where they were losing money, and it was because they weren't allowed to just simply, I don't know, I guess be simply about driving advertising revenues, but they were kind of subsidized by the government, and therefore there was a different sort of framework that was conditioning how it was that they went about their dissemination of information. So I do think
the
that there's a
fairness
difference.
doctrine you're talking about, yeah?
Is that what it was? The fairness doctrine?
Yeah, it was the idea that when the television airwaves were first constructed, that these major network channels could have access to them, publicly taxpayer-funded airwaves, as long as for 1 hour a night during prime time they aired news, local news, and that this assumption was that they wouldn't be able to make money off of this because news was boring and everyone wanted to watch I Love Lucy instead. And so they would have to operate a little bit in the red, and that was their basically their payment to the populace for using these free airwaves. Not, of course, realizing that eventually they could figure out a way to sell advertising revenue by making the news super sensationalistic, right? And so, that's all true, right? And I agree with you that it's more of a question of degree,
right,
and not of kind. But at the same time, we're talking about the post-war era, where we had things like McCarthyism and the Red Scare, and we had people worrying about the Black Panthers going around raping and killing white women and children, and all sorts of things that would look like very familiar today as far as fake news from a lot of these sources. So it just seems to me that this is just a phenomenon that's going to exist when you have the profit motive involved in news, just in different forms, given the context and the available resources. An example I was thinking of that I wanted to kind of mention is the Overton Window. The Overton Window is this idea, this kind of political idea, that there's only a certain range or a window of options that you're able to talk about in public discourse about politics. So, for instance, the window would not include, like when Hillary came out and said the idea of socialized medicine or single-payer healthcare would never happen in America and was ridiculous. When Bernie was going around talking about it, that was basically her enforcing the Overton Window, saying single-payer healthcare is not part of the Overton Window. It's not a respectable thing you can talk about. It's outside that window, and therefore I don't even need to really address it on its own merits, right? So the enforcement of that window is clearly not a rationally justified thing. It's just what news agencies basically tell their pundits and what you're allowed to consider as a legitimate thing and what you're not allowed to consider as a legitimate thing and just reject out of hand. That's ideology. That has nothing to do with fact-based reporting, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, ultimately what this does come down to is, again, the ubiquity and power of ideology to condition social relations, right? It is there. It seeps through everything. So it isn't that there's some sort of conspiracy theory. This isn't like some Alex Jones shit, right? Where the lizard people are the ones who are actually sort of dictating what information comes to you by some sort of intentional, conscious set of measures. Sure, that does happen sometimes. I'm sure that does happen sometimes. I've never been in an editing room in a newspaper or some sort of large-scale publication, so I don't know. I'm sure that does happen sometimes.
That's Russia. That's the Kremlin.
yeah, exactly.
They literally do that.
Yeah, that's, German propaganda, right? I'm sure that does happen in some ways. But that aside, what is persistent, what is everywhere, what is constant is the idea that simply the way that we think, the way that Hillary Clinton thinks, whether it's because she thinks she needs to say this because this is what's expected, or whether she truly believes that a single-payer healthcare system would never be possible in the United States, I don't know. But there is some sort of undercurrent that is conditioning the words that she says when she's on a campaign trail. And that's why, what did you call it? What's it called? The Overton?
Yeah, the Overton Window.
The Overton Window. That's why the limited measures or the limitations within the Overton window exists because there are stops. There are things that are allowed and there are things that aren't allowed. There are norms. There are truth norms. And news is going to be subject to those truth norms.
Yeah, I think it's really important to emphasize that point you kind of made in the beginning, that ideology does not happen at the level of the individual. And especially the individual's conscious decisions.
Right.
Ideology happens at the level of a society and a culture, a group of people, and is enforced by individual decisions. So when Bernie comes out and starts talking about certain ideas like free college and single-payer healthcare and all that, as if there are legitimate options and many other countries do it and it's totally respectable, then that sets the Overton window and changes it a little bit, right? Individual actions do affect that. It's not like a determined construct that can never be changed.
Right.
But it's not created by individuals. It's not controlled unilaterally by individuals, like in some conspiratorial framework.
Right.
And that's kind of an important structuralist point to make, right? Otherwise, you just get doom and gloom and say, well, we can never change anything. No, we can. It just have to realize it doesn't come from changing one individual's mind.
Right, right. Which is also good, too, because then that means you don't have to feel guilty and beat yourself up about the fact that, you know, the burden lays within your own heart and that it's some sort of conversion thing, right? We're not talking about, I don't know, some sort of, like, modified evangelicalism or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Norms can be changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just takes work and doesn't involve, like, you know, just changing the president's mind or electing somebody who is good-hearted. We tried that. Guess what? It didn't work.
So now we're just nihilists and we're like, fuck it, we don't need someone who's good-hearted.
Exactly, right?
Oh,
we went from one pole to the other.
Yeah, that's so funny.
So I got a question for you, Austin.
All right, dude.
Looking at this post-truth stuff, I kind of see there being two ways to go about making things better.
Okay.
I have an optimistic goal in mind and a pessimistic goal in mind.
Okay.
Now, I have a good feeling where you're going to go, but I did want you to kind of think about whether you thought this was a good way of setting up the program for the future. Mm-hmm. The optimistic goal seems to me that if we're in this situation where we make our own history, but not of the conditions of our own choosing, then the optimistic goal would be to make good faith, deliberation, and argument a social and political norm again. Or maybe not again, just for the first time, maybe. So that we don't have this horrible, cynical bullshit going on. And we can actually sit down or stand up and have good faith arguments and deliberations with people and try to come to conclusions that are to the benefit of everybody. The pessimistic goal, in my mind, seems to be, well, if we've always been in this post-truth world, then if knowledge has always been power, then we should just cynically weaponize knowledge and try to win, which is exactly what happened, right? Fake news was maybe not purposefully, but maybe just accidentally weaponized in order to win an election, or partially, in part to marginally win an election. Then shouldn't the left just weaponize fake news for itself?
God, how would that even look?
I'm seeing that. I feel like I've seen that happen already.
Have you?
The Russia stuff.
Okay, so what do you mean, though?
I mean, I see a lot of people in the center left claiming that Russia basically unilaterally stole the election, which, I mean, they released or possibly hacked into some emails and released them.
Podesta's emails, right?
Yeah, they didn't hack the election. Like,
yeah.
I'm seeing headlines of hacking the election, and that makes me think, oh, they literally hacked into the voting booths and changed the results. No, there's nothing about that. They just affected the election by basically making some news stories come out.
Here's the problem. Here's the problem.
Bullshit.
It is bullshit. Here's the problem. On the right, the fake news is just sort of kind of homogeneously accepted. Even if they all know that Pizzagate is bullshit, they're kind of like, it doesn't really matter if the details are accurate. It's the sense that Hillary is an evil human. That's all that matters. That's what's being communicated. So nobody on the right really spends too much energy refuting it. Whereas on the left, people are getting angry with other people on the center left for saying that Russia hacked the election. And then you get all these people that are center-left liberals who are calling out Republicans to call out Trump or Russia for hacking the election. And then you get people on maybe the further left or other people on the left who are like, you guys need to stop saying that Russia hacked the election. Apparently, a lot of Americans who were Hillary supporters or who identify as left actually believe that Russia literally hacked the election when that's not exactly what happened. So on the left, you have a fracture, whereas on the right, you don't. You have solidarity. And I don't think that weaponizing fake news will ever actually serve anything, because I think you have individuals on the left, and I don't want to say that there aren't individuals on the right who have integrity, but there is a sense where I think individuals on the left are always going to be like, no, wait a second, let's not do that. You have the Intercept, right, and Glenn Greenwald in them that are always going to be like, no, let's actually try to understand what this really is, rather than just simply using this sort of shallow superficiality. And I think it's because there's a level of analysis that seems to characterize leftist criticism that doesn't characterize sort of more conservative criticisms. And I know that might be a bit of a generalization, but I'm going to kind of stick by that, at least tentatively.
There's definitely a sense in which the left seems to love to criticize literally everything, including those who are the closest to them.
Yes.
And you see maybe a little bit less of that on the right, or even if you see it on the right, it doesn't fracture in the same way it does on the left.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. At the same time, we've kind of always had this fake news stuff on the left. The same thing happened with Bush, right? Rather than focus on how we went to war based upon fake news, which was the real important, nodal point there. There was a lot of talk about how Bush is actually part of Skull and Bones, and they sacrifice babies at Bohemian Grove and whatever, right? And so it's the same thing, right? It's probably not literally true. Most people, I think, would say that, even read that stuff. But it kind of reinforces the point that bad person is bad.
Yeah.
And so that makes me happy. Or even just it's sort of ironically digested.
Yeah.
Someone's a little bit more culturally observant. And so they're just kind of like, oh, yeah, I know it's not true, but it's like, it's hilarious. And so
exactly.
And then you ironically consume it.
Exactly. And then they can pat themselves on the back because they're standing above it. And they're like, no, but you don't understand. I'm just consuming it ironically. I know it's not actually true. But then those same people aren't going to give that same benefit of the doubt to the conservatives who are consuming fake news. They're like, no, they really believe that Hillary Clinton has a pizza parlor where there's like, she's raping children or whatever the fuck the claim was. There's like some sort of child labor, or what was it? Child sex slavery or some shit like that. I don't know what it was. But it just comes down to this frustrating tribalism, man. And so I'm not sure that cynicism and irony is ever really going to produce anything other than perpetuating resentment and building up barriers. So between those two choices, I mean, obviously I'm going to choose the optimistic route, because I do believe, like I mentioned in my shitty minute, I do believe that we can cut through those barriers of cynicism and anger and frustration and the sort of limited paradigms of thought that prevent us from making genuine connections that we can build from. I believe it, man. I fucking believe it because I've experienced it. I've experienced it over the weirdest fucking mediums. Over Twitter, over Facebook. I've experienced it in person. I've had it happen with me. So I know that it's fucking possible. The problem is it's hard, and it takes a lot of effort, and it takes fucking patience and resolve and commitment, and it takes a little bit of hope. And I don't know, man. I just don't know that those characteristics are all that popular. I don't know if we have time for it. It hurts. It's not easy. It's much easier to just binge watch Netflix and then kind of do your own thing. But I don't know, man. I don't think that's the best way. I really don't.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, even just in like a form of meta-cynicism, in the sense of even if it could work, it's not going to, because the other side's way better at it. So it's not going to work anyway.
Right.
Like that's meta-cynical, right? And so even if that wasn't the case, I would still reject the pessimistic goal of weaponizing it. But even just for pragmatic reasons, it's just not going to work. So just don't even try it. Like, you're going to lose. It's like if you have a small basketball team, are you going to like play slow and play inside out? Or are you going to try to play fast and run the team out the court? I mean, you got to work with what you have, in a sense, too.
Yeah, it's like what you've said about with trolls. You can't troll trolls. They're going to fucking troll the shit out of you,
They love it. It's their game.
That's their game. Whereas for us, for those who aren't trolly, we don't. We actually get frustrated and we get angry and we get resentful. Whereas they're sitting there and they maybe just don't give a fuck, you know? And that's not good because it's actually affecting our quality of life if you're not the troll type, right? So I love what you said. It's exactly right. It's like you're a basketball team. The Golden State Warriors, they weren't world champions until they started running that fucking motion offense, until Kerr came in there and said, all right, this is what we got. We've got speed, we've got shooting, and we're going to hustle on defense. We're going to switch fucking everything. Everyone is 6'5" to 6'7", 6'8" with long arms, and that's going to be our defense. We're not going to worry about pick and rolls. We're not going to run a zone offense or a zone defense. We're going to run what works for our guys. And then, you know, world champs. That's what we got to do. I mean, if you're going to figure out how to actually accomplish the goals that you care about, I think you gotta work within your strengths, and you gotta know who you are. And I think that's maybe the real problem with the left is I don't think the left knows who it is or what it wants to be, and it's got this dispersed set of ideas that it sort of understands because it knows what it doesn't want to be, but it doesn't know what it does want to be.
Yeah, so who's LeBron in this analogy? Who just comes in and dunks all over everyone's faces?
Bernie Sanders.
Blocks the shit out of everything.
No. I don't know. Do you mean like the leftist LeBron or like the just the LeBron and it doesn't matter?
No, if the left organizes so well and has a great program, then LeBron just comes in and dunks everyone's faces. Nothing matters anymore.
And he comes. You're up 3-1, and
yeah, I don't want to believe that. No, but I really wanted to riff on what you said that last point that the left knows what they want to, or they're not, but they're not sure what they want to be. Right? They haven't constructed a true identity yet. And to me, I've harped on this before, so I don't want to be too much of a broken record, but I do feel like I'm more and more convinced that this is not a thing that's going to happen on the internet, which is where it seems like the left is trying to mobilize itself. Not that you should escape the internet. It's definitely a tool, but it can't be the location of this norm construction, right? Norm construction is very abstract. It's very, we'll know it when we see it, but we're not really sure how it's going until it's actually had an effect on some big, large-scale factors like elections or whatever, right? And so I'm really convinced that people yearn for connection, even the trolls. They yearn for connection. And the internet offers them a place to be cynical without sort of punishment or without any consequences. And so you also yearn for that, especially when you're frustrated, right? To get rid of that frustration. Still, everyone wants that connection. And so if you have good faith, caring interpersonal dialogue with people, then you really can change minds. I mean, the two of us know that more than anybody because we had our minds changed about like really big things that affected everything we thought about the world around the same time. And so that stuff really does happen. And a lot of it goes back to people honestly like being caring and ourselves caring about the truth and about each other and wanting to get to a point where we had some sort of stability in our thinking. Not that we have stability in our thinking, but we wanted that. It's a goal on the horizon you never actually reach, right? Exactly. And so in that sense, places like the classroom and family and friends, probably not family because everyone hates each other in families nowadays, but like friends and friend groups and social gathering and stuff like that. If you actually care about somebody and show that you want to know more about them and you want to learn from them as much as you want to help them learn and not just trying to talk down to them or to teach them like some paternalistic sense, then you really can eventually over a long period change people's minds and have your mind changed as well. And people respond to that and they learn in that way. I think the classroom is probably the best place to do that. Not that it always happens or that it's perfect or anything, but I've found that students respond to a teacher who cares about them and who wants to know what they think and involves them in the process of learning and learns from them as well, much more than someone who talks down to them and tries to just fire hose facts and information at them. And I'm not saying that will never happen on the internet. I think we should try to make the internet more like that and try to enforce those and construct those norms on social media, but it's not there right now. And so if we look to that as the locus of this norm construction method, then it's just not going to work because you're going to lose that battle.
So do you think that that there would ever be an overcoming of the designation post-truth, or are you just simply saying that we just need different types of social constructions?
That's a complex philosophical point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you tell me, do you have to have some absolutist sense, some correspondence theory of truth, in order to say that there's a sense in which we can have access to truth?
I don't think so, because I would argue that there are objective truths, ... for us. And what I mean by that is I think that everything is contingent, everything is process. And so sure, there are de facto states of affairs. It is a case that I am holding in my hand a coffee cup, and it is a Nestle Toffee Crisp coffee cup, which Toffee Crisp, if you guys don't know, if you're in America, is a British Irish candy over on this side of the world. It's really fucking tasty. But there's a coffee cup, and it's got its fucking orange colors, and so I'm holding in my hand a coffee cup, but it's also true that it's a coffee cup because we call it a coffee cup. And that Toffee Crisp is some bullshit manufactured product. That does it exist? Sure. Does it exist objectively? Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by objectively. But it's also the case that it's filtered through the conditions of consciousness and language and historical construction and social relations and economic relations, and that it's a capital good that's serving a different good. So is it true in itself in the metaphysical sense that people want to clamor towards? I don't think so. So I am a constructionist in that sense, but at the same time, I don't think that in any way invalidates the possibility that I can still speak with some semblance of force about certain things. So I can say that inequality is a social bad, but that isn't just simply some sort of subjective opinion that I have to hold to myself and that I can't impose upon another person. I think that it is something that is objectively true, but it's objectively true for us.
I think to kind of add on to that and tell me if you think that I'm like tracking with you here. To say that if the goal is that there has to be some absolute sense of truth for all time that is completely unstained by subjectivity or whatever, then of course we're never going to get there. Like that's a hopeless endeavor. But at the same time, you can absolutely say that some things are more true than others. Relatively speaking, you can sort of put these things next to each other and you see a difference. They don't look the same. And so maybe it's incremental, and maybe that incremental move is sort of like an asymptote, and it just kind of inches closer and closer, but never actually truly reaches some grand metaphysical notion of capital T truth. But I mean, if we're talking about the political scene here, isn't that kind of the point of politics? Politics is deliberation. It's compromise. It's working together with people who are different and have different desires, who maybe don't even know what their desires are currently constructing their desires.
Yes.
And so that whole process is going to be kind of stumbling around in the dark. But you can stumble around in the dark with a plan, right? Using your other senses. Yeah. Or you can stumble around in the dark like a drunkard and just fall into shit and break everything. And those two things are very different.
Yeah, and sometimes when you stumble around in the dark, you put your hand on something and you say, oh, that's the doorknob. And then you're convinced and you're like, guys, come over here, I found the doorknob. But then you find out it's a false door. And it's not the door that actually gets you to where you need to go. But that's okay. That doesn't mean it wasn't actually a doorknob and that it wasn't useful to gather people around for that particular end. And maybe by gathering them around, maybe it got you closer to the doorknob, or maybe it didn't. But maybe something else came from it. And that's the idea, is that you can still find useful bits of experience from within a blind world of seeking a sort of more equitable future, or whatever it is that you're aiming towards, a virtuous future or a just future, or a future of flourishing communities and life and freedom, or whatever fucking terms you want to use. But that's the thing, is I think we need to not be afraid to aim towards those big terms, right? And then we need to kind of have a more sort of open dispositional outlook that will, I don't know, allow us to experiment and at the same time create better social relations and better ecological relations and better environmental relations, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, 100%. The thing that I would say then is I just think it's always going to be post-truth, We should actually, let's stop using the term post-truth as though it's some sort of negative thing, and let's just talk about different types of constructions or different types of social arrangements and different types of avenues of accessing truth. So rather than bemoaning the fact that this news is fake, let's recognize, okay, that there are news stories out there that are bullshit and they're causing harm. And that's really why the fake news stories are ridiculous. But let's look at them and then let's try to say, okay, the reason this is ridiculous is because of such and such a reason. The problem is when you're going to get people that you present them with the information and you're like, well, this is a bullshit story. And they're like, oh, that's just a cover up. And then you're like, well, fuck, I can't deal with you. I don't know what to do. So, but again, I think it just requires patience in that instance, even to say, okay, I get where you're coming from. But then I would ask them, I'd be like, why are you so rigid? Why are you so willing to just hunker down and double down on this in the face of overwhelming evidence that such is not the case? And that's what I think is important. And it's the concern to try to figure out why that matters to that person. And why do you think the other side is pure evil? And why do you think that these people are out to get you? And why do you think that Hillary Clinton is just pure evil? Why do you think that the Antichrist is going to be manifest in the body of a political president an American president? Those sorts of things. Like, let's talk with people. Let's understand them. And then let's try to build from those connections, I guess. And then create new bullshit social constructions, ones that are happier.
Yeah. No one was ever convinced by being told they're an idiot. That's for sure.
No. Fuck no. All right. Well, sick. That's such a great talk, man. I feel like I could talk about that shit forever. Because that's obviously one of my main interests is the power of the imagination. And I tend to believe that everything is ultimately a product of the imagination. So for me, I'm all about that shit, man. Images everywhere.
Yeah, and the key is, just to riff on what you said there, yes, everything's constructed, but one, that's not a bad thing. And two, just because everything is similarly constructed doesn't mean you can't use certain small t truths as regulative ideals that can then direct you towards better constructions than others.
Exactly. And the idea is once we do recognize that everything is a construct, that means that we can create it differently. And so to me, it's the most hopeful and most invigorating thing to really ponder that if things are just constructed the way they are because of various historical power relations and physical conditionings, because obviously biology, physics, the environment and stuff like that have constraints on them that we have to factor in as well. But if we recognize that, then we recognize that everything is contingent, which means that it could be otherwise. And that we can make it otherwise. So let's fucking make it otherwise, man. Let's stop just accepting the status quo or accepting the present state of affairs. And let's build better worlds.
We must imagine Nietzsche happy.
Awesome, man. Well, let's move on to the next segment then. And let's go to Sticky Motherfucking Leaves. Troy, what is giving you meaning in a world that is often devoid of meaning in 2017?
Oh, man. Devoid of meaning is right, because my Sticky Leaves this week is Manchester by the Sea.
Oh, God.
Which I just saw last week.
Yeah.
And I saw it after we did our Sticky Leaves episode, so it didn't get included into my films of the year. I'm not exactly sure where it would be, but it would probably be in the top 5, right around there. It's a movie I will never see again, ever. Ever. I'll never even think about seeing it again. It's not fun to watch. It is not entertaining. I shouldn't say it's not entertaining. It's beautiful, and cinematographically, it's nice to watch and pleasing in that sense. And the performances are great. Casey Affleck is incredible in it. That said, all that pleasing stuff, pleasurable stuff, is so overwhelmed by the just hopelessness and despair that just permeates the film. Huh. You have not seen it, correct?
I have not. I don't even know what it's about.
Okay, so I'll just give you a quick little synopsis of what you know in the beginning, but I won't go beyond that. Okay. It's Casey Affleck is a guy who's endured some of the worst tragedy you could possibly imagine, and it's especially pointed because of the, I don't know what you'd call it, but sort of the accidental nature of tragedy, and how it's not even purposeful. It's just completely random and hopeless. And him trying to figure out how to live in the world, given that's the case. And the beginning of the movie starts with his brother, who's a really good guy, played by Kyle Chandler, who's always cared for him and been sort of like a kind of an older brother father figure type. He dies, and Casey Affleck's character has to go back to his hometown of Manchester and do the funeral arrangements and help his nephew, his older brother's son, navigate high school and everything. And it's such a difficult film. The entire time I'm rooting for redemption because of what's happened to this character, and I want him to find meaning and to find social connection and care. And I don't want to give too much away, but the movie does an incredible job of setting you up for these things and then just dashing it, but in a way that's not cynical at all. It's like the most hopeful kind of despair I could have imagined seeing in a film.
It's still kind of tragically poetic.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because even tragically poetic, I'm thinking of that sense of Greek tragedy where you have this Pyrrhic victory, right? Where you lose, but you win because the way you lost, right? And it's not that way at all. It undercuts that entire notion of winning whatsoever. It's basically just like don't even try to win because you're not going to. But there's still a glimmer, a little bit of hope there for something. It's not just a dash all of your hopes, despair, the world's going to end, heat death of the universe oncoming type of thing. So I would encourage anybody to watch it. I mean, it was incredibly cruel that it was released during the holidays, because this is not a movie you want to watch during the peak of like suicidal ideation in America, which is during the holidays. It's gut-wrenchingly sad. I mean, like, I think, and this isn't speaking out of turn. I don't cry during movies, like hardly at all. I can count on like one hand the number of times I've done that. I think I cried 3 different times.
Oh Jesus! Then I'm gonna be a goddamn wreck because
you're gonna be a wreck when you see it. Make
softie.
sure you're in a good state of mind.
Jesus! So make sure I go see La La Land afterwards. Is what you're saying?
You won't want to. I would say see La La Land first to set you up to like a high default point, and then Manchester by the Sea will only bring you down so low. But I would encourage anybody who's thinking about seeing it to see it. It's one of the most honest depictions of suffering and what redemption actually looks like. Not these false notions of redemption that happen in the Greek tragedies, like the Pyrrhic victories, but true, actual redemption, what it really looks like in practice, and not in a metaphysical and religious sense, where everything changes and everything is washed away and you're a completely new person, which is false and actually induces more suffering, I think, in the end. It's really, really great for that reason. And I'd love to talk about it more once you see it.
Okay.
Because I think there's a lot of overtones that would be interesting to us to talk about.
Did you ever see Blue Valentine?
I never did. That's the, what's his name?
Ryan Gosling. It was Derek Cianfrance is the director, but Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams.
I heard that was pretty tough too, yeah?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if you'd seen it, if it has a similar type of despair. It may not be. I mean, I'm assuming Manchester by the Sea, Casey Affleck it's basically about him and his personal tragedy and then kind of dealing with that. Whereas Blue Valentine is about this couple, and it's a sort of tragic, nihilistic, I guess, depiction of love and relationships. I mean, I guess that makes it's much more than that. It's much more complex than that, but it could be seen as that. And a lot of people have spoken about Blue Valentine the way that you're speaking of Manchester by the Sea. And so,
yeah, Manchester by the Sea is not nihilistic at all. It's not nihilistic. I would never tag that to the film. I don't think it's. I think you could probably interpret it that way if your hope is that there has to be full redemption, or else everything else is worthless. Then you might see it as nihilistic. Obviously, I think that's actually a form of nihilism to hope for full unmitigated redemption. And so this is very much a suffering is occludes there ever being true absolute redemption. But that's not really a redemption anyway. It's just a way of covering over your suffering that never really deals with it. And so this, I think, is actually much more hopeful than some Disneyfied version of everything is good in the end.
Yeah, I mean, that was Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity, right?
Yeah, it's a constructed power grab.
Right.
Which even on the individual levels is certainly true. But yeah, we could talk more about suffering and redemption. We kind of like that stuff. We had an whole episode on forgiveness, right?
I know, man. Well, that would be good then. Yeah. So I got to go see Rogue One, I got to see Manchester by the Sea, and I got to see La La Land, and then we got to see Silence. And then
we definitely got to see Silence and do an episode on that for sure.
And so, yeah, so are we just going to do like some fucking movie episodes that are going to talk about some heavy shit? Are we talking about Rogue One in a movie? Or in an episode, I mean?
I want to do that.
A full episode talking about Rogue One.
Yeah, we can. I think once you see it, you'll see how we can definitely do that.
Do you want to do
Not that it's a great film or anything, but just topically.
Okay. Do you want to do one with Manchester by the Sea too?
You see it, and then we'll talk about it and we'll figure it out.
And maybe we can do like a bullshitting on it or something.
It's a little too heavy for bullshitting.
Maybe I'll have a sticky leaves about it.
Okay.
Okay.
Speaking of bullshitting, though, what'd you do for New Year's? Awesome.
Oh God, New Year's. All right, so New Year's, I don't know if I should mention this in public. Hold on, let me have a think. I'm gonna fucking say it. I don't give a fuck. It doesn't matter.
Change everyone's name, but keep the historical circumstances the same.
Okay. Basically, let's just say that I was getting ready to go out and enjoy a New Year's celebration, and I didn't think I even told you this, Troy. Although I did call you a little bit inebriated that night, so I may have told you this. I don't really remember. But I was supposed to go see this show, this performance, at 5 o'clock here in Dublin. It's called Skydance, and Dublin is trying to turn its celebration on New Year's into one of the worldwide events. You know, like New York has Times Square, and Sydney, Australia has the fireworks over the Opera House, and all the various places have their spots, right? Well, Dublin is doing their thing where they've got this festival. It's a 3-day festival, and so they're trying to attract lots of tourism during this time of year. And Skydance is one of the culminating events. It's this really cool aerial fucking pyrotechnic light show thing, whatever. Really, really kind of a cool thing. But that's not the point. Getting ready to go out. All of a sudden, about 20 minutes before I'm supposed to leave, the cops barge into my front door. And over here in Ireland, they're called Garda, Garda. That's the Irish word for police. I think it's guard, something like that. Guard, police. But Garda, hands up, police. I'm like, what the fuck? And my hands go up, and basically they performed a drug raid on my house.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Let's just say that there was some shady shit was going down in my house, apparently. I had nothing to do with it, everybody. Don't worry. I am okay. But so the cops broke into my house. They had a full warrant. They had to do searches on the persons that were on the property, and everybody pretty much was gone. I live in a house with a couple of dudes, and everybody except for a friend of one of the dudes was there because everyone else was kind of home for the holidays. But they came there with a specific purpose in mind. They searched the house. They got what they needed. And then they left. And they didn't tell me anything. So that was how my New Year's started. It was really fucking weird. And then I thought I was going to miss the show. But then it ended up that we didn't miss the show. And we got to see the show. We got to go to the later showing of the show because I tweeted the motherfuckers. And I was like, guys, I had an emergency and I couldn't leave. So we had tickets for the 5 o'clock show, but can we end up going to the 7 o'clock show instead? And they tweeted me back and they were like, yeah, you can go. They were really sweet. Actually, we just kind of showed up anyway on prospect or on the chance that we would make it, but they did. And then I found out later that they tweeted me. But still, shout out to NYF Dublin. You guys were sweet. Not like they're listening to this fucking podcast anyway, but still. If for some reason someone does. And then ended up seeing the show, had a really nice dinner, and then ended up at a karaoke bar doing some karaoke and singing some songs. But it was really lovely. So I actually had a fantastic time. Even though the night started off really fucking weird, it was redeemed in the end.
Damn, dude, you should make that into a... who's the guy who does all the movies with Seth Rogen?
Judd Apatow?
Yeah, you can make that into an Apatow film.
Yeah.
I mean, James Franco needs to play you at some point.
Can I be friends with him in the film? That would be much more preferable.
Damn, dude, you had like a full-on no-knock raid.
No knock, dude. I even asked him, I was like, how'd you guys get in? how'd you guys get a key? And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't disclose anything. So I'm like, what the fuck is going on? But they wouldn't tell me anything, dude.
Dude, like, now you know what it's like to like be black in America. This would never happen to you in America. In Orange County? Are you kidding?
I know, dude. I mean, usually there'd be a knock at the door, right? They didn't even knock. They just fucking came in. I was like, Jesus, man. But it was weird, though. They knew exactly what they were there for. They did it. I mean, obviously they tore the house up a little bit, but not that bad. And then they left. And I have no fucking clue what's going on. And I don't want to give away too many details, but let's just say that I haven't heard anything from anybody about anything. So I don't know. So it's really fucking weird.
Yeah, we're going to do like next week's episode and you're going to be like in jail. It's going to be crazy.
Live from Dublin's prison cell. I'm not going to lie, though. I was actually worried. I was like, what happens if they find something in my room and I swear, like, it wasn't mine, but they plant something or somebody else planted something, you know? I was thinking that. I was like, I don't have anything illegal in my room. So I'm like, what the fuck? But the one cop was really cool. He was downstairs talking with me and I knew that I was from California, and we were talking about like how weed is legal in California now. He's like, hey, just so you know, like if we find like a little bit of weed or something like that in your thing or in like your bedside table, he's like, that's not going to matter or anything like that. That's not what we're here for. And I was like, okay, cool. that's good to know. Thanks, man. But it was weird, man. They were literally there for one reason. They came in, they got their shit, and then they bailed. So, I don't know.
Man, I got nothing on that.
I don't know.
Chill.
You told me there was exciting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I got sushi, I got cheesecake, and I went bowling.
Okay, well, when you say it like that, I went to a show, I had some risotto, and then I had a couple beers, and I went to a karaoke bar. That sounds boring.
And I got no knock rated.
Yeah, I skipped that part, but sell it, man.
I had a great time. It was a wonderful New Year's. I don't want to do a whole lot of shit for New Year's. You know me. Yeah. But bowling, I feel like. I just want to make this point. You know me. Big Lebowski is my favorite film of all time.
Yep.
Bowling is like the only sport, or at least of the most of any sports, fun even if you suck at it. You have no idea what you're doing. Like, no one goes bowling and is like, man, this sucks. Like, you may not have a great time. Kind of depends on who you're with, right? Mm-hmm. But as long as you're with good people, then bowling is always great, I feel like.
Yeah. Did you put bumpers up?
Oh, of course not.
Of course not. Do you remember what you scored?
Yeah, I got a 150-something on my first one. And the second game, I was at like 130 with 2 rolls left. And then midnight hit, and then that was over. You
got over that shit, yeah. Have you ever bowled over 200?
I've gotten in the 180s or 190s a few times, I think, like a long time ago. But I don't remember if I ever hit 200.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
Have you?
See, I think I can't remember if I have. I think I'm same with you. I may have. Because I used to go quite a bit on Friday nights, especially in America. You know, you can't drink until you're 21. So, 16, 17, 18, 19, going bowling was a common thing. And then even when you're over 21, like in LA, they've got Lucky Strike, which is basically a bar with a couple bowling alleys in it. So we would go sometimes. But I don't know, man. I think going bowling on New Year's sounds fucking awesome.
It was great, man. They had a full-on dance soundtrack. And it wasn't like all shitty music. There was some lot of good, more contemporary stuff, and so it was fun. I loved it.
Did you do did they play the Auld Lang Syne at New Year's?
No, they did not.
Really?
Thankfully.
Oh, you can't stand that shit?
I just don't want to hear it ever again.
Ever again. So you don't generally dig New Year's?
Does anybody?
I mean,
or does everybody get hyped for New Year's, and then on January 2nd, they're like, man, why was I hyped for New Year's? That's what I feel like everyone says.
But that's what I feel like everybody says for any of those drinking holidays. Patty's Day, anything like that. They're like, oh my God, St. Patrick's Day is coming up, and everyone gets all hyped. And then you go out and you drink, and then 2 days later you're like, oh, it was just like any other Friday night where you went out and you got drunk.
Exactly. Just hang out with people that are awesome and that you care about, and like do stuff that's fun. Like, who gives a shit about everything else?
Well, see, that's the thing, though. I think a lot of people do intentionally save money, or they save up energy for these special holidays. So they let loose on the 1st, right? And then people get excited about a fresh start, or they're excited about proposing to somebody on New Year's Eve, because that's a thing that a lot of people do, right? So I think a lot of people save up their energy. Whereas for me, I'm just much more interested. It's like, hey, how about Tuesday can be your New Year? Or how about like Thursday night when you decide to meet up with some friends and go to a bowling alley? That can be your New Year. You know? Anytime can be your New Year.
Well, that's fucking easy for you to say. You have, like, boundless energy. You're like the fucking sun, dude. You can just, like, wake up on a Tuesday and be like, this is my New Year's. No one else can do that, yo.
I don't know. Maybe. All right, so is there ever a New Year that you've had that was absolutely terrible? That you don't have to share it, but is there one that you're like, hey, yo, New Year's suck? Is that why you're not a big New Year fan? Because there was one that was like, this is the worst day ever?
Dude, so a friend of mine was asking me that on New Year's Eve, and I couldn't remember. I can't remember anything I've done on New Year's. Like, other than, like, the last 2 years. Like, maybe, I don't know if I'm getting old or if college was just involved too much alcohol, and so I don't remember what I did. But I can remember Christmases. I can remember birthdays. I don't remember for the life of me what we did in New Year's back in the day.
It's so funny, dude. I literally had the same conversation. I was trying to remember, and I remembered a couple years ago where I didn't do anything except for, like, hang out with some family friends. And then I don't know, man. Maybe I was drunk, but I don't think so. I really don't know, dude. I have a feeling I'm going to remember this New Year's, though.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We've also, like, cemented it to tape, so that's something.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, well, since we both had a good New Year, even though it doesn't really mean anything and it doesn't have any sort of value other than symbolic value that we can construct if we so desire, let us enjoy 2017 moving forward, Troy. Let's set resolutions and make goals for ourselves. And, let's take that positive momentum from our New Year's Eve and New Year's celebrations into the new year. This world is our oyster.
Nah, fuck that. Heat Death of the Universe oncoming.
Okay.
Are we throwing it to Michael?
Yeah, let's throw it to Michael.
What up?
With first-class legroom, free cocktails for everyone, and a schedule you can depend on.
Hello, welcome, bienvenue to This Week in Hip Hop with Michael Burns on Owls at Dawn. Special shout out to everyone who still has an AOL email account. I always say that I'm going to be real quick this week. It's my new thing I'm doing. So I'm going to be real quick, and it takes like 8 minutes. This week, I'm actually going to be really quick because not a lot happened in terms of new music coming out. So I want to talk about a few things that I hope to see in 2017, besides the greater hope that I have for 2017, which is the world is not a terrible shit show of disappointment and fascism. But in hip-hop in particular, what do I look forward to in 2017? Here's a few things. First thing, new music from Freddie Gibbs. We didn't see a lot of Gibbs released this year. He had some legal issues over in Europe that are now taken care of. So he's putting some stuff out. He's already announced a collaborative project with Currency. I think that might just be an EP. It'd be great to see him get back in the studio with Madlib. That is something that is rumored to be happening. But either way, I would love to see some new Gangster Gibbs released in 2017. Another person we didn't hear a lot from this year, except for some really good guest verses, was Earl Sweatshirt. I think there's some talk that Earl has some issues with his label. He was pretty pissed about the rollout of his last project. But Earl is still, I'd say, top 5. I know it's an annoying thing to talk about, like top 5. But I think Earl's still top 5. And it'd be really good to see some music from him this year. And I think it'd be really good to see him working with some different producers. He put out a track with Knowledge this year that I thought was really strong, so I'd love to hear him more on some Knowledge stuff. He was on a Sam I Am record. I'd love to hear him on some Sam I Am beats. So it'd be nice to see him work with some different producers. But either way, we need some Earl. Another thing which should happen, I'm curious to see if Kendrick puts out a record this year. He is headlining Coachella. It'd be good if he had some new material for Coachella. So let's see if Kendrick puts something out, but I'd like to see it. A lesser known artist who I'd like to hear more from this year would be Goldlink. Goldlink put out one of my favorite projects of 2015. I think he's one of the illest people making music out of DC right now. I think he has a really unique style, and it still shocks me that Goldlink hasn't become a bigger artist. The way that he sort of combines a melodic flow over selection style production, which is really cool. So hopefully we see that. In terms of the hatred I feel in my heart. Something I'd be interested to see in 2017 is the Drake decline. I feel like it has to happen. Like, I feel like post-Views and now with Drake being in this sort of fake romance with Jennifer Lopez, we're going to see some sort of Drake decline. I'm kind of excited about it. Sorry, Toronto and Aubrey and the cast of Degrassi, but I think we need it. And what I'd really love to see, because I'm sick and dead inside, I'd love to see a Future and Drake beef. There was some Future tweet this week that people were attributing to him looking back at his collaboration work with Drake and thinking that Drake just kind of used him. Maybe that's the case. I have no idea, but that would be really funny. And it'd be really funny to see Drake in like a real beef anyways. And I guess that pushes me on to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was Pusha T. Pusha T, who was famous for throwing subliminals at Drake, and Drake having an inability to respond because he knows what's good for him. But I think we're supposed to get a Pusha T album this year. We had some singles come out this year. We had Drug Dealers Anonymous, the song with Jay, come out. I think the other track was called Circles that came out, but we're supposed to get a Pusha T record. I hope we get it. And it would be good to have some good music come out on good music. I'm sorry for the triple layered pun right there. I want to kill myself for that. But either way, good music has kind of become a shit show. So it will be really good to see Pusha T have a good record. Another artist, this is the last one I'll give you, that I'm hoping to hear something from this year is Flying Lotus. We haven't heard anything new from him for a couple years now. He has a film called Kusho that's coming out, so it might be that we get a soundtrack that accompanies that film, but either way, I'd really like to hear some new Flying Lotus this year, and in particular, it'd be great to hear Fly Low doing some more work with hip-hop artists. He said for a long time that he's completely down to produce tracks for rappers. He just doesn't get the request. And along with that, hey, maybe we have a reoccurrence of Captain Murphy this year. I will be fine with that as well. Two things have happened in new music recently, and I'm just going to talk about both really briefly because they're both disappointing, different levels of disappointing. The first is, and we'll just be real brief on this, Kanye has a new single out with Tyga. What the fuck? There's nothing positive that can be said about this. Tyga is a joke. He's the worst music artist person ever. Kanye is currently falling off further than like a can of Coke that rolled down the side of Mount Everest. And it's a ridiculous song, and it's gross that anyone is letting this come out. So whatever, fuck it. The other thing that makes me way more sad is this December 99th project, the one that came out with Yasin Bey, formerly Mos Def, and Ferrari Shepherd. Man, if this is really the last album that comes out that Yasin Bey is involved with, it's really sad that this is how he's going to end his career. It sounds very uninspired. Lyrically, it's really underwhelming, and it's just really sad because I think at its peak, the artist that was then known as Mos Def was one of the most important, most gifted, most skilled hip-hop artists who has ever walked the face of this earth. So it really sucks that he's declined like this and is putting out a project like this to end things. Word is some of these farewell shows he's been doing have actually been pretty good, so that's good to hear. But either way, it's sad, especially in a year where so many rap artists aged so well, and which so many of these great projects came out by people in their 40s. It just sucks to see that time has done something to the man formerly known as Mighty Mos Def. But that's all for me. We'll be back next week. Shout out to everyone that still has a GeoCities website. Shout out to Austin and Troy. Hopefully you all have a good 2017. Hit me up on Twitter if you want, or find me at my place of residence. Bring me some cookies and we can chat. Have a good one. I'm out.
As a bird, you scarcely realize you are traveling.
All right, thanks for that, Michael. I'm definitely looking forward to that new Fly Low.
I mean, I don't even know who some of those people are that he was talking about. So I guess I'm just looking forward to a little bit of an education. Well, let's wrap up this episode. We will be back another time so that we can bemoan about people bemoaning about the world. Does that work? Bemoan about people bemoaning? Meta-bitching. We'll meta-bitch next week. In the meantime, hit us up on Twitter or Instagram, owls_at_dawn. You can shoot us an email, owls@dawnpodcast@gmail.com. Anything else, Troy?
I guess it's just Das Vidania, Amerikanski.